Yeah, hi, my name is Dylan Barrell. I'm Chief Technology Officer at Deque, and I wrote the Agile Accessibility Handbook, which is what we'll be going over today. And my co-presenter is...
Hello, everyone. I'm Katie Olson. I've been with Deque for about 4 years now. I'm a customer success manager and program consultant. I live in Minnesota. I have 2 teenage boys and a black lab puppy that is really still in the naughty puppy phase, so she's keeping us on our toes. I just want to say thank you all for being here, and I hope you enjoy our session today.
Yeah, thank you. I hope the puppy comes and interrupts the presentation, provides a little bit of comic relief. When we first started helping organizations, and by the way, Katie has completely undersold herself. She's one of the most experienced and knowledgeable people with some of these projects that we've done. But we were often brought into the process to evaluate applications that had been in production for some time. And we did these lengthy, costly, comprehensive assessments and delivered these reports that were then most of the time just completely ignored by the development teams. And as we dug into the reasons why, it became obvious that a lot of these teams were using agile development processes, and the product has moved on quite a lot since we started that evaluation. Another common pattern we saw was that organizations were going through some kind of redesign, and they said, oh, just wait, we're doing a redesign. We can't do an accessibility assessment right now. And so it was pretty clear to us that organizations weren't really integrating accessibility into the development process. They were considering it this kind of after the fact, very manual process, which was incompatible with Agile. And we knew from our own experience and from working with some of the more forward-looking early adopter organizations that, in fact, it was possible to integrate this into Agile. And if you didn't do this, then trying to do it after the fact really led to complete failure to address accessibility. So we also knew that it was much more affordable if you integrated accessibility into your development process. And this is really what motivated me to pull together all of the things that we'd learned, the things that had worked for us and for some of our customers into what I'm calling the Sweet 16 of accessibility practices. And that's kind of the core of this book that you're seeing on the screen here. The Agile Accessibility Handbook is documenting these practices. And so today we're going to be talking about the Sweet 16 of practices, how to implement them in practice, and how to manage the change associated with adopting it, because that's as important, if not more important, than the actual practices themselves. So Agile is a pretty hefty topic, and you need a whole multi-day workshop to cover all of it. But really, it boils down to, in our opinion, a simple concept, and that is that Agile is a mindset. It's not some rigid set of dogma that you've got to perform come hell or high water. And it's with this spirit in mind that we're presenting these practices today. Not that you just blindly go out and do as we say, but that you understand what we're trying to achieve with the practices, why we adopt them, so that you can evaluate them and even adapt them to your situation. So what the Agile mindset does do, though, is it takes these Agile principles and an obsession with the customer and the end user and empowers teams to operate independently so they can iterate quickly and execute and learn and adapt and deliver based on what they know, the highest possible value to the business within a network of teams, because most teams are within large organizations and so have to work together well with other teams. And in order to do this, the team really needs to grow and evolve their understanding of their customers and users with and without disabilities. And they need to do things independently, and they need to do them efficiently. In order to maintain that efficiency, they also need to continue to evaluate what they're doing so that they can improve their craft. So some of the key things that we're talking about here is that understanding is key, whether it's understanding of their users' needs or understanding of people with disabilities. It's really important to take that into account so you can design solutions that meet that understanding. Efficiency is important. So for any Agile team to do things optimally, Agile is about speed, so you also need to be efficient. Continual improvement is a very important concept, and that means that teams need to look at themselves, evaluate themselves, and measure themselves so that they can improve. And independence is very important as well. If a team has to wait for some outside resource or some other team to do things, that slows them down. And so teams need to be able to become independent. So as we've looked at the things that teams themselves need to adopt, or the problems that they need to solve in order to really achieve good accessibility in an agile development process, we've kind of grouped these into 3 different categories. There are the category of practice that helps the team to improve their understanding, increase the understanding of people with disabilities so that they can use this in designing solutions. There's a set of practices that help the team to deliver efficiently. And then there's a set of practices that help the team to learn and improve over time. And by adopting and excelling at these 3 core categories of practices, the teams will achieve independence over time. And we'll talk a little bit later in our program level practices about how those can help to drive the change necessary to achieve all of this. So different team members come to the table with different levels of understanding around accessibility. Just a few years ago, it was quite common when I went to conferences or when I met with customers for developers or people in development teams to not really know that it was even possible for a blind person, for example, to use a touch phone. And you could see the lights going on off in their head when I would pull out the iPhone, turn on VoiceOver, and start using VoiceOver to navigate through an app or through a website or something. And so, although this, kind of level of understanding is less common today, it still exists, but it's less common. A lot of the nuances take a lot more time to really learn and understand. So, for example, the concept that not every blind person is fully blind, and therefore they use maybe a screen reader in combination with looking at the screen and magnification is also something that it takes time to learn. The second thing is that the concept of people having multiple disabilities. So simply replacing visual information with audio information is not really good enough, because if somebody is both blind and deaf, then they won't be able to use that. A Braille device needs to be able to get the semantic information in textual form so they can present that to the user. Also the understanding that people change their assistive technologies for the context that they're in. So somebody who maybe uses VoiceOver with the audio most of the time, when they're at a conference like we are here today, they may want to use a Braille keyboard because that allows them to listen to the conference presentation while taking notes or multitasking on their computer, like many of you are probably doing right now. And then finally, teams don't remain static. So people join, people leave. And so for all those reasons, it's essential to continually give the team opportunities for the team to learn, to interact with people with disabilities, and use that experience to turn the team members into allies for accessibility, foster a deeper and a richer understanding of users with disabilities and the evolving technologies that they use to access the digital world. So some of the practices that we've used for good effect for increasing understanding are, firstly, what we used to call empathy events. And empathy is really just about understanding. So these are events that are there designed to increase understanding, where we bring development team members together with people with disabilities, putting a face and a name to something that can otherwise be this sort of relatively abstract concept of a blind person or a person with cerebral palsy. And it really helps to open up their mind. The team members can understand the difficulties better, understand the technology uses and how people use those technology better. They can ask questions and they can create lasting relationships. And it's much easier to conceive of, hey, let's do this usability study with Steve and let's set up a Zoom call with him, or versus this abstract concept of, well, we need to try to find some person with a disability so we can do some usability studying with them. So creating those relationships is also an important part of those events. Which brings me to the second practice, and that is finding ways to recruit users with disabilities for different types of research, whether it's discovery, whether it's a usability study. There's nothing more powerful than actually seeing somebody struggling with your application to create a real sense of urgency and understanding of what needs to be done. And the third practice is really around communication. So designers put a lot of effort into designing the user interfaces and making sure that there's an explicit translation of the semantics of that UX and UI to the dev team and the testers so that they can implement that in an accessible way. communicating that semantics and making sure that both designers and developers understand the information that really needs to be communicated so that they can ask for it. And documenting those semantics helps the developers and testers to be able to faithfully implement that. And so some of the practices we've implemented there is teaching them how to annotate designs accessibly, also opening office hours so that they can ask questions of people who are more experienced with that sort of thing, accessibility support channels, etc. So moving on to the effective delivery, these three practices are really important, and perhaps the most important if you really want to drive the cost of accessibility down into the low single-digit percentages. The first one is one that creates an asset that can be leveraged over and over, bringing many times a return from an accessibility perspective. It's important to create an accessible design system or pattern library. And if you already have one, this is one of the best places you can start, is to take that pattern library or component library and make it accessible, because it really magnifies the impact of the effort that you put into that. So whether you're creating one from scratch for the first time and bringing in accessibility knowledge to make sure that that's accessible from the start, or whether you're remediating one and getting the leverage that way, this is a really great way to get a big impact on your accessibility project. The second good way to start is with automation. Agile and automation are almost synonymous, and you'll find that a team that has a lot of automation in their testing and in other aspects is likely to be a team that's also highly agile, and vice versa. So for this reason, we recommend really highly the practice of adopting accessibility automation tools like AxeCore, which is of course the best tool that there is, because these tools can find a large percentage of your accessibility violations immediately with a click of a button or a single call to an API. And AxeCore can find 57% of the accessibility, accessibility violations completely automatically. And if you layer on top of it a tool like Axe DevTools Pro with the intelligent guided testing, you can push that number up into the 80%. And so it's a really good way to get a big bang for your buck in terms of finding and fixing accessibility issues. And the third place that we recommend adding efficiency is where you have to do manual testing, whether that is in fact using the intelligent guided test or fully manual testing using screen readers or other assistive technologies. Leverage your testing automation practices to create automated regression tests for that testing, so that you only ever have to do that manual testing once, unless something changes, unless you've changed that part of the code. And so take that testing and encapsulate it into automation as much as you can. And your accessibility design annotations, if you've documented them during the design phase, can be really useful in helping you to automate that. So things like the accessible name can be automated in such a way that your regression you can avoid manual testing in your regressions. Then the final three team practices are related to continuous improvement. Measuring and reporting on accessibility is extremely important, and then bringing that into your retrospectives within your agile process and your sprint planning, so that you can improve on that, is a very important practice to learn. So the second practice is to systematically manage your accessibility defects as well, and then including accessibility in your retrospectives and sprint planning in general is also an important third practice in this category of practices. So you'll want to be able to show your progress of your team. So setting up a way to measure that early on in your practice, and there's many different ways that you can measure accessibility for your product. You can set up automated scans. So those same libraries that I talked about earlier can be used to set up automated scans. So this is one of the quickest and easiest ways to continually check for your current state of accessibility. Now, if you've got a fully automated regression suite with AxeCore built into it, you can use that to generate your data for your report. If you don't have that, then there are tools like the CLIs and Axe Monitor that can be brought in to help to generate those reports on a continual basis. Another way to do this is to track your bugs. So whether you're finding accessibility bugs through automation or whether you're finding it through manual testing, if you include those into your bug tracking system and tag them with accessibility, potentially tag them also with the impact and with the success criteria that they're related to, then you can track progress over time. And you can also see how long the bugs sit in the system and how quickly they get remediated. And these are great metrics to use to see how your accessibility practice is improving over time. It allows you to see how many bugs are being introduced in the first place, which gives you an idea of how good your practices are, and then you can see the change over time as well. And if you have an accessibility policy, which Katie will be talking about a little bit later, you can then also use your bug tracking system to measure how well you're adhering to that accessibility policy. I talked a little bit about including accessibility in sprint planning and retrospectives, and this is really important early on. As team members are learning the skills, to be able to bring some of these results from the testing into the retrospective and talk about how the team can improve and perhaps avoid creating those bugs in the first place. Do they need new training? Do they need access to other resources? And what can be done to just improve practices over time? And we talked about the accessibility policy and how that can help you with tracking how you're adhering to that. But one of the most important things for the accessibility policy is also to specify how you deal with accessibility bugs. What is a high impact accessibility bug versus a low impact accessibility bug? And being able to take that accessibility policy and use that for your prioritization can help you to focus your efforts more effectively and focus on the stuff that is higher priority. And that should help the team with prioritization and also can help the team to judge the accessibility risk over time. So if you do this, this can have help you prioritize and have the highest positive impact on where you put your effort on in your accessibility efforts. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Katie, who's going to talk a bit about the practices for transformation and how you can make some of those team practices stick. Katie.
All right, thank you so much, Dylan. All right, so thanks, Dylan, for covering the team practices that will help teams effectively produce accessible products in an agile environment. So in this next segment, as Dylan said, I will discuss the program level practices that will help you manage your accessibility transformation. So implementing agile accessibility is a big transformation and requires organizational change to ensure it's successfully implemented and adopted throughout your organization. Most members of a product development team have not had formal training in digital accessibility. You know, it isn't often taught in college or development level courses. So they'll need to learn new process and new skills and have ample support along the way as they adopt the new behaviors. And, you know, change can be scary, right? And is often met with resistance, especially if it isn't planned for and implemented correctly. So because of this, it's essential that you have the proper change management techniques in place to go through your accessibility transformation. And there's many change management methods out there. And if you're interested in learning about some common change management strategies, you can check out the recording of the change management for accessibility session that was held yesterday by Michael Harshbarger and Heidi Kelly Gibson. All right, so before I get into the program level transformation practices, I want to touch on the different approaches your organization will need to take to ingest accessibility into your products. So there's two main approaches teams face when looking to make their digital content accessible. One is to remediate the issues that exist within the shipped product, and the other is to build accessible user experiences by default. You may think of these as being proactive or being reactive. On screen, I'm showing two cycle diagrams. The one on the left shows the reactive cycle that has steps for assessments, assigning issues, fixing issues, and validating those fixes. You may need to do a remediation project, for products that were shipped without accessibility requirements. If you think about product development practices, you're starting at the end with the shipped product and then determining what rework needs to occur to remediate those issues. This, of course, is not efficient or cost effective, but it's often necessary for those that need to retrofit accessibility into their products. The diagram on the right is the proactive cycle. This has steps for tools, training, testing, and tracking. And when taking a proactive approach for accessibility, you're shifting as far left in the product development lifecycle as possible and starting with accessible designs. And that proactive nature is carried through the rest of the SDLC. Keeping in mind that starting with accessible designs can prevent up to 67% of accessibility issues. And the mission for the proactive approach is ensuring products are released free of accessibility issues. And this, of course, is ideal. All right, let's get into the 7 transformation practices for the program for establishing and operationalizing your accessibility program. Hold on, I need to go up a slide. There we go. All right, so the 7 practices fit into 2 categories. The first being the foundational practices that will help you establish your program and make it operational. And the second is about learning and creating awareness throughout your organization. The 4 foundational practices are creating an central accessibility team, obtaining executive buy-in, creating and enforcing an accessibility policy, as Dylan talked about briefly earlier, and reporting on your accessibility transformation. The 3 learning and awareness practices are give the team accessibility coaches, execute an ongoing empathy campaign, and publish learning resources and bulletins. The Central Accessibility Team is the core for your accessibility program, and it's important to have it established as early as possible in your accessibility journey. Some key responsibilities of the Central Accessibility Team are create and manage the corporate accessibility policy, educate executives on the business case for accessibility, and obtain executive buy-in. Provide best-in-class tools. Dylan talked about automation earlier and how important it is to get tools in the hands of the developers so that they can prevent accessibility issues from shipping. Create, gather, and report the metrics that are going to be used at the program level to measure your transformation. Keep abreast of developments in accessibility and socialize them. Create and maintain the organization's accessibility standards. Choose the guideline that you're looking to obtain and socialize that. Provide access to accessibility and create and maintain the learning resources for your entire organization. The central team can be implemented as a hub and spoke model as demonstrated in the graphic on this slide. I'm showing the accessibility team as a circle in the middle with connections out to each of the teams. You can think of the Central Accessibility Team as a center of excellence, as they will be providing the requirements, the guidance, training, process, and tools out to the development teams. This is important because then we have a standardization in place and all of the teams don't have to invent it on their own. So highly encouraged to use that central team to do those things. So next up, your central team will be responsible for obtaining executive buy-in. There are many business cases for accessibility that will help you achieve this. And it's important that you have top-down support from your organization in order to be successful in consistently delivering accessible software. Too often I've seen in practice where accessibility is deprioritized because of some other major initiative, and that really can't happen. It needs to be built into the day-to-day product development practices for your organization in order for it to stick. Some of the business cases you could use are accessibility is a big market opportunity. There's 61 million adults in the US that live with a disability, and that's 1 in 4 adults. Furthermore, the total after-tax disposable income for working age people with disabilities is almost 500 billion. This is 2019 data, but still you can see that you could grow your revenues by making your products accessible to this large group. Avoiding the potential costs of a lawsuit is another business case you could consider. Over 4,000 digital ADA lawsuits were filed in 2021. And that was up 15% over 2020 and up 75% over 2018. This data comes from the Usable Net year-end report from 2021. So avoiding the potentially high cost from a lawsuit is a really good business case you could use for your executives. The cost and time for remediation is also high. So the cost of discovering defects after release are much higher than if you prevent them in the design and architectural phases. So think about all the steps and touches required to fix a bug that was found in production. It's much more efficient and cost effective to prevent those bugs from occurring in the first place. Finally, it's the right thing to do. Providing equal access to all is the right thing to do. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of some of the business cases you could use. And after you've achieved executive buy-in and have the organizational support for your accessibility program, the next step is usually to establish that digital accessibility policy we touched on briefly already. You should pull together key partners such as your legal team, your risk team, and compliance team to understand how your organization manages risk. You really don't want to invent something new if you already have some formal process in place for managing risk. So as you work with them and define the policy, here are a few important things to consider. You're going to want to be specific and define the digital properties that are in scope for your policy. Create an inventory of those properties and also be sure to consider third-party content. Define the accessibility standard that you're targeting. Document the timelines required for fixing known bugs. It's a really great practice in your policy to define when bugs should be remediated. And Dylan had talked about also defining the impact level or the severity of the bugs. So you may have critical bugs that need to be fixed much quicker, maybe in the next release, and you might have some minor bugs that can maybe be pushed out to a later release. But really identifying what those severity levels are and the time that's required to fix them is a really good best practice for your policy. You're also going to want to monitor and review progress that your policy is being adhered to. So I'd suggest you establish a cadence and a method for product teams to self-report on the state of accessibility for their products. So maybe on a monthly basis or some other cadence that makes sense for your organization, have those teams self-report and send a report of accessibility for their product to the central accessibility team. And then you can also perform audits to ensure the policy is being followed. And then finally, you might want to consider establishing gates for accessibility checks prior to product releases. This would be to ensure that accessibility bugs are not being introduced with new releases. And I've seen the digital accessibility policy as a standalone policy, and I've also seen it added to existing policies. So maybe your company already has some form of accessibility policy, but it hasn't considered digital accessibility. So perhaps you could build it into that existing policy and just enhance it to include digital accessibility. All right, so as your central accessibility team is getting started, they should also identify the metrics that would be used to measure the progress of your digital accessibility throughout your organization. So establishing a dashboard that can be shared with key leaders is really important. You'll need to show the progress you're making and prove the ROI, or the return on investment, to your leadership so you can continue receiving funding and support for your program. Some of the dashboard components could be the current state of accessibility for all of your digital products. This could be a high-level view of how many issues exist in your products, with maybe some drill-down options to look at the issues by product or by team, or even by page or screen, and also by that severity level we talked about. I'd track this over time also with the trend line so that you can show the progress that's being made, or if there are any regressions, you can be able to indicate if maybe there was a regression that needs to be looked into. The column chart I'm showing on this slide is an example of this. In this example, I have 4 months across the bottom of the chart, January through April. And there are 2 vertical bars for each month representing the 2 products that I'm reporting on. You can see that product 1 had 300 issues in January, 275 issues in February. So it looks like they did some remediation between January and February. There's 150 issues in March, so they did even more remediation, and 38 issues left in April. This is a great example of progress being made on a specific product. The example is similar for product 2, except it doesn't look like they made any progress between March and April because the number of issues stayed the same at 100. So as the lead of the central accessibility team, I would want to know why. So I would follow up with the product owner for that team and try to figure out what's going on, see if they need some additional support to help them remediate those existing issues. Bug tracking, Dylan talked about bug tracking earlier and making sure that bugs are being tagged with accessibility so they can be reported at the team level. I'd also make sure that's a component of your dashboard at the program level. So it'd be a best practice to, make sure that you're reporting out how many bugs exist and how long they're taking to get resolved for that team. Leadership is probably going to be really interested in how long accessibility issues are staying out there. So having that information at the program level by product and by team is really important too. Training activities are another component of the program dashboard I would consider. So as Dylan talked about earlier with new people coming in, some people leaving teams, it's really important to track at the individual level who's been trained in accessibility. And you can also track it at a team level, so you can get to know the maturity level of accessibility for individual product teams as well. So I'd consider including training as a method to track on your metrics as well. So those are a few ideas, at least, to get you started with your reporting dashboard, and hopefully you'll find those useful. Another really important program level transformation practice we'll talk about is coaching. And this kind of takes us into the 3 learning and awareness transformation practices that I had touched on earlier. So one of the best ways to teach a team new process and skills is to give them a coach that's an expert in the area. You've probably heard of Agile coaches being instrumental to helping teams and organizations adopt Agile practices, values, and concepts. We recommend a similar approach with accessibility coaches. The accessibility coach is embedded on the team and trains each member how accessibility fits into their specific role. So they'll work with product owners, BSAs, developers, QA Scrum Masters, and help each of them one-on-one understand how to apply accessibility into their role. They'll coach them through the transition and help them attain the skills they need to build accessible products. The coach will work with the team until they reach certain milestones and ultimately become self-sufficient. The chart I'm showing on screen demonstrates the curve of the coaching engagement through team self-sufficiency. Coaches will quickly ramp up to tight integration with the team. They'll assist in the application of tools and automation, that important team practice that Dylan talked about earlier, and that will help them gain an exponential jump in team self-sufficiency. Over time, as coaches are utilized less often, the team approaches graduation. At that point, the coach disengages and moves on to the next team. So I'll talk about how I've seen this actually done in practice, a couple of different ways. So one organization I worked with was developing a new product, so developing it from scratch, and they wanted to make sure it was shipped without accessibility defects. So this is the proactive approach we talked about. In this case, they brought in enough coaches to support the numerous Agile teams that were developing the new product. The coach helped them create accessible designs, helped them develop an accessible component library, taught them to write accessibility acceptance criteria for their user stories. They taught them various coding and testing techniques and how to use assistive technology to test for accessibility. And of course, they also brought in the automation tools to help them test and fix issues while still in development. In other organizations, I've seen this done on a bit of a smaller scale, where they were about to embark on a remediation effort. They knew they had accessibility issues in their shipped product and they wanted to fix them, but they didn't have any accessibility training under their belt. So in this case, they brought in coaches to help them prioritize their remediation activities and provide direction and techniques on the coding and testing of their remediation efforts. So this is an example of the reactive approach we've talked about earlier. Both are likely necessary, and both are definitely good approaches to take. That just gives you a little bit of flavor on maybe different states your organization might be in and how that might be applicable. So finally, on the coaching topic, giving your team accessibility coaches should help them get to self-sufficiency much quicker than if they were learning those new skills on their own without that coach in place. All right, so executing an ongoing empathy campaign is also essential to eliminate the empathy gap for new employees and even existing employees. And this can be done using a variety of methods. You can host awareness labs where people with disabilities demonstrate navigating your company website or mobile app using assistive technology. This can be a very powerful tool for those that haven't experienced it before or those that are newer to accessibility. You could also host an event on Global Accessibility Awareness Day, where there are several activities to participate in, such as hackathons, simulation events, or even having people share personal experiences about their own disabilities. I worked with an organization that had quarterly events like this, and they had people talk about their own disabilities and the challenges that they've worked through and that they've overcome in their life and their careers. And that was really helpful for people to really understand where they were coming from. So whichever approach you choose, the goal is to raise awareness and get people actively involved in your digital accessibility mission. The final transformation practice I'll talk about here is published learning resources and bulletins. Providing easy access to the tools that will assist in creating accessible content is essential. This kind of goes along with, we want the central accessibility team to help establish the standards and the practices so that every team doesn't have to invent them on their own. So you'll need like a central repository to hold that information. And you can do this by setting up a Confluence page or a SharePoint page or any other software solution that works for your organization. But I would suggest including the documentation such as your testing methodology, links to your testing standards, techniques that can be used for remediation, and your bug tracking best practices, how to tag your stories with accessibility. Link out to your accessibility policy as well, so folks have that at the ready. And the goal is really to organize all the learning materials and tools in one place, so it's easy for your teams to find and follow. And experience has also shown that people like to be involved. We talked about getting executive buy-in earlier. It's also super important to get buy-in from the product teams that are going to be working on building accessibility into their products. So provide your employees with opportunities to get involved as well. You can create digital accessibility focus groups that meet regularly and plan ways to get more folks in the company involved. They can do things like publishing a newsletter with disability-related stories, organize the empathy campaigns that we talked about, or they can host lunch and learn sessions on specific topics, or even set up a blog that's related to digital accessibility. And finally, just make sure that you're reinforcing the positive behaviors that are driving the desired outcomes. When teams or individuals are doing good things in the accessibility space, be sure to celebrate their wins. Congratulate them publicly. Post it in your company newsletter. Set up a kudos board. Give them some fun accessibility stickers or a cool t-shirt. Whatever method you choose, just make sure you're celebrating the positive things that are happening with this transformation. Positive reinforcement will go a long way with your Agile teams as they're going through this big change. So as I begin to conclude the presentation portion of our session today, I want to remind you that accessibility is not a one-time project. It's a journey, and it is going to take time to achieve the outcomes you're looking for. So it'll take a little bit of patience. And you may progress through your journey as shown on this slide here. I'm showing an image of a blue and white mountain with a red accessibility flag at the top. And there are 3 steps going up the mountain. Step 1 acknowledges that a common place to start in your journey is with assessments and remediation of your digital content. This is that reactive approach we talked to. It's very common to start here. Then step 2 is where you bring in formal training, start building your internal subject matter expertise, and implement tools to help with scaling and efficiency. And the evolution from there is up to step 3, which involves developing policies and procedures and a maintenance plan to ensure accessibility continues to be a priority for your organization. When you successfully implement the Sweet 16 practices we talked about, you can expect to achieve high velocity accessibility outcomes. So thank you all for listening to Dylan and I. And at this point, I will hand it back over to Heidi and see if she has any questions lined up for us.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Dylan. Great stuff. All right, so we did have quite a few questions come in. I am going to go through these in the order in which everybody has voted for them. So one thing that was asked about at the beginning is, if your team is brand new to accessibility, where's the best place to start as far as learning and basic minimum things to include and look out for?
Well, I think you can talk about this from a perspective of what teams can do and what the organization can do. So let me address the teams, and then Katie can maybe address the organizational transformational stuff. I think it's important, first of all, if the team is working on something new, to include accessibility in the design process early on. So whether it's accessibility annotations, making sure that the design is accessible, helps to avoid rework. It really shifts stuff as far left as you can. I think the second thing that's really important is, because it's really easy to adopt, is you can adopt some of the automated testing tools into your process. So for example, if you adapt Axe and the Axe DevTool Pro tool, you can find up to 80% of your accessibility issues without needing to be an expert. And you can also find out how to fix those things really easily. So that's a really high impact thing that you can do. And then the third thing is to really support that learning. And I think accessibility coaches are one of the most important things you can do to bring that into the team, so that they can really help that team focus, learn, and improve over time. And so then I'll hand over to Katie from a transformation perspective.
Sure, thanks, Dylan. So the first thing I would say is, if you do have a central accessibility team or individual that's trying to work on getting a team formed, I would connect with them first. But many organizations, especially product development teams that are new to accessibility, probably don't have a central team or individual in place yet. So I think it's really important to start with the fundamentals and start doing a little bit of research to get a good understanding of what the digital accessibility fundamentals are. And then I think also Dylan mentioned this too, but you could start using some automated testing tools like Axe. The beauty about Axe is, as you run your tests, you run your scans, and issues are identified, there are some learning links within there that will help you and give you some remediation techniques. And I've actually experienced this. A former colleague of mine was just getting started. He was an engineer working on a product and had never had any accessibility training before. He started using the Axe tool, and he built a lot of his knowledge base from using that Axe tool and the remediation tips and techniques that were built within. So I think that would be a really great place to start as well.
Great. Another question is, what are the specific accessibility responsibilities for the different Agile or Scrum roles? Or do you know where that information is available?
You want me to take this, Dylan?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I'll cover, some of the most common roles. So the product owner, for example, they're usually responsible for prioritizing accessibility. So you really need to have your product owner on board to ingest accessibility into the product, because they'll be in charge of prioritizing those stories in your sprints. The BSA, for example, or the BA, they're usually responsible for writing the user stories. So making sure that they're including some acceptance criteria inside those user stories is really helpful. Developers, we talked quite a bit about developers using automated testing tools to ensure that as they're developing and writing their code, it's free of accessibility issues. They could also take that further beyond automation and use the intelligent guided testing tool that Deque has that can allow them to catch up to about 80% of issues. And then if you move forward down the SDLC and think about QA, so they should also be doing some automated testing. They should have some accessibility testing built into their regressions. And they should also be doing some of the manual testing as well. Some of those looking for some accessibility issues that cannot be caught with automation. So pulling out a screen reader and stepping through the pages is building with a screen reader. Keyboard testing, some of those types of things. So QA should make sure that they're accounting for everything that can't be caught with automation as well. So those are some of the common roles in a Scrum team and what some of their responsibilities are. Anything you would add to that, Dylan?
No, I think that's great. I think the only thing is design. You know, if a design is part of your team, which if it's an agile team often is the case, then it's really the designer's role to also think about people with disabilities as they're designing their application, to bring people with disabilities into their discovery, to their personas, their design thinking, and then to communicate all of that stuff to the rest of the team, so that everybody knows that that thing that they're looking at on the screen there, that that looks like a button, well, is it a button? Or if it's a more complex widget, how does a keyboard interact with it, and that sort of thing. So I think the designer plays an important role, especially in if it's not a remediation project, if it's a new development project.
Yeah, good call. Thank you.
Thank you both. Can we provide an example of proof that accessibility directly impacts ROI?
Well, can we? If we have the data. I don't know. This is more of a, do we have a session on this in AXCON? Is GW presenting? I don't remember off the top of my head. This is, we have done sessions like this in the past where we've looked at the ROI of accessibility, and we can certainly put you in contact. If you send us your information, we can put you in contact with people at Deque who've done studies of this for companies, and have the data to back some of these things up. But of course, every given instance is going to be somewhat unique, right? So, can we help you to measure and justify this for your organization? Yes, we can help you do that.
Yeah, and I think I'm not sure if there is a presentation on that at this AXCON, but there has been in the past. So I think the webinar is available maybe out on the Deque YouTube channel. You might locate that webinar for the ROI for accessibility. But I mean, really, and like Dylan said, we can further help you measure that and be able to report out on that. But I mean, even if you think of going back and having to rework your products that didn't have accessibility baked in from the beginning, if you think of all the touches that are required to go back and remediate those bugs, I mean, sometimes they have to go all the way back to design, right? And then you have stories that need to be written for the remediation. Developers need to go in and remediate the code, and QA has to do the testing. So if you just add up all the costs of those touches, that's one of the best ways to help prove your ROI. Yeah,
certainly on the proactive approach. Yeah, that's definitely, and one of the best arguments you can make about being proactive about accessibility is that there's a lot of data out there that proves how much cheaper it is if you do it right from the start rather than doing it retroactively.
One just came in that I would like to bring up because we just have a minute left here. What do we feel is a realistic timeline for organizational transformation to incorporate accessibility? Do we have any thoughts on how long it takes?
Yeah, so experience has shown, and this is part of why I said it takes time. It's a journey. All of this takes time to establish, to really mature your accessibility program, where you're getting your program established, you're working on your business case for accessibility, you're getting your funding, you're getting your executive buy-in, start to pull in all of your training materials and your tools and start to build out what your practice is going to look like. It's a multi-year effort in many, many cases. Now, that doesn't mean you can't start to see progress earlier than that, because as your Agile teams are getting trained and starting to apply accessibility, they are going to make progress. But in terms of getting to the point of having a really mature accessibility program where you have your policy and it's being enforced and it's being measured and reported on, that's often a multi-year effort.
Thanks, Katie.
And of course, depending on the size of the organization. So smaller organizations can achieve, this maturity at a different pace than really large organizations can. If you have hundreds of teams, it's going to take you time to get all those teams to the point where they're all mature. And once again, prioritization is key. So you can pick your teams that are working on your most highly trafficked, highly used, and most important applications and functionality first, and you're going to get the most impact there as well.
Thanks, Dylan. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you again, Dylan and Katie, for a great
Thank
session.
you.
Thanks everyone for attending. Friendly reminder, you can come back and watch the recording at any time, and enjoy the rest of XCon.
Yeah, have a good time.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.